Hey friends, it's Corey from Hey Let's Make Stuff. In today's video, we are going to be talking about the WeCreat Vision Laser machine. Now, I get a lot of requests for different videos on my channel, and right now reviewing this machine is at the top of my list. I've had so many of you ask about it and how it compares to some of the other diode lasers on the market. So in today's video, we're going to talk about all the specifications, the features, some of the accessories that you can get with this machine, and then in another video, I'm going to compare it to some of the other diode lasers that I have. So if you're unfamiliar with this machine, the WeCreat Vision is a diode laser, which means that you can cut, score, and engrave a bunch of materials to make all sorts of projects. I do think that WeCreat has done some really compelling advertising, especially on places like Facebook. So if you've seen any of the ads for this machine, you'll see that this top basically goes up and down. And I think that has a lot of people interested in what this laser can actually do. We're going to talk about that auto lifting feature a little bit later in this video, but for now, we're just going to dive into some of the specifications of this machine. Let's start with what type of laser this is. So I've covered this in many videos, but this is a diode laser, and that differs from other types of lasers, including a CO2 laser, infrared laser, and a fiber laser. A diode laser is less expensive than these other types of lasers that I'm talking about. That makes them really good for hobby crafters because you can get a machine that you can do all sorts of projects on without having to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on a different type of machine. Biggest difference between this type of laser and those other types of lasers is the color of the light of the laser itself. So a diode laser has a blue light, whereas the other types of lasers basically all have infrared lights from what I understand. So because this is on the visible light spectrum, basically we can see the color blue, it means that it can cut most things, but not all things. So a diode laser like this will struggle to cut things like clear, blue, some whites, anything sort of translucent when it comes to acrylic. Something like a CO2 laser is able to cut those with no problem. That being said, that's basically sort of the only limitation of a laser like this. If you want to learn more about cutting acrylic with a diode laser, any diode laser, I do have a video on that and I will go ahead and link to it. So if you're thinking about getting this laser, but you know that you primarily want to cut acrylic and especially clear or blue or other translucent colors, then you're probably going to want to save up for a CO2 laser. If you're okay cutting other colors, dark, opaque acrylic, as well as wood and leather and other things, then a diode laser will work just fine for you. The WeCreat Vision actually has a swappable laser module, which means that you can get a 20-watt laser module, a 40-watt laser module, and an infrared laser module. I have the 20-watt. The 20-watt is probably best for engraving. You can also cut a lot of different things on it, but if you really want that cutting power for things like slightly thicker wood, then you're probably going to want to go with the 40-watt. I do think a 20-watt is actually sort of the sweet spot for a diode laser. I do have a 40-watt, but honestly, I feel like the 20-watt is perfectly good for most users, and it is quite a bit less expensive. The infrared module, which you can get and swap out the laser module in your laser, is more for engraving things like metal. So it can't actually cut, but if you want to do something like fine metal engraving, then you may want to look at getting the infrared module as well. So I don't have an unboxing video because you guys know that I don't actually really like telling you about a product until I have used it. So I will say that it was boxed very well. However, I unboxed it terribly. So I didn't see the instructions on how to unbox it. I'm not sure if I just didn't see them or if they weren't where I could access them, but I am going to link to the unboxing instructions down in the description below because I did it completely wrong and I made it way too hard on myself. If you follow the instructions that they have, it's going to make it really easy for you to unbox your laser. Just make sure you're following those instructions and don't do what I did. The box basically has everything you need to get started using this laser. So you're going to get the laser itself, and the laser head is already installed, so there's no installation necessary there. You're also going to get a vent pipe, which we'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute. You're going to get all the cables and cords that you need to plug it in. You're going to get an air assist, which is a small box that basically pushes air onto your projects as it's cutting to give you cleaner results. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. You're also going to get some panels that go in the bottom of your machine so that you can put your projects on it and create airflow underneath, as well as a removable tray at the bottom so that you can pull that out and clean out your machine. There's also a bunch of small parts, screws, screwdrivers, like grease, and a whole bunch of other things that you will need to sort of maintain your laser as you go. Setting up the WeCreat Vision was super easy. I basically just removed some packaging materials from inside the laser, added the vent pipe and the cords to the back, and connected the air assist. I think all in all, it took me only about 15 minutes to set it up and it was ready to use. Now let's talk a little bit about the size. So it is about 44 pounds, which makes it a little bit heavy and unwieldy for me to move around. I think I can lift 44 pounds, just not when it's about 24 inches wide. It's a little awkward for my arms. For me, it's really a two-person job. However, my husband, he can pick it up just fine. So you may want a buddy if you don't have like long arms or if you can't carry a lot of weight, but if you can, then you can probably pick this up and move it around yourself. And like I said, it's a little under 24 inches wide, it's a little over 20 inches deep, and when this is fully down, it's only about 10 inches high. When this is fully lifted, it adds like another 8 to 10 inches, and then when you open the lid, you're adding like another 20 inches. So this is not fully raised right now, but when it is, this is quite tall, so you just want to keep an eye on that when you're designing your space where you want to put this. The actual cutting size in the bed is 15.75 by 10.63. And you will need another 8 inches of space or so behind the machine to account for the vent pipe. Now let's talk about safety. So one of the number one things I look at when I'm talking about lasers these days is safety. And this machine actually has some good safety features. The first thing I look for on any laser is an auto stop. So if you're cutting something and somebody goes to open the laser, it automatically turns off and you don't have to be worried about being exposed to that laser. It also has this orange top, which means that you can watch your project being processed without damaging your eyes. It's basically like having a welder's helmet, but it's attached to the machine. I also like that this is a fully metal enclosure because I feel like that is more flame retardant and just better than something that is made of plastic. It does make the machine heavier, but overall, I just think it makes it safer. Those features make me very comfortable using it here in my studio. I always have a fire extinguisher and a fire blanket anytime I'm doing laser cutting with any of my machines. I do have a list of my must-have laser supplies, including some safety items. I have a whole video for that, so I will go ahead and link that as well. Now let's talk about venting. The WeCreat laser does need to be vented just like any other laser. So when you are cutting or scoring or engraving in your laser, basically that laser is removing material from whatever you're processing, and that material turns into smoke and fumes and debris, and that needs to be basically extracted from the laser so that it doesn't mess up everything going on inside. And because you don't want all of that going into your craft room, you do have two options for venting. The first is to vent out a window, which is what I have been doing with my WeCreat. They actually sent me also this nice little fan, which I think is working really, really well. It basically increases the amount of pull of air through that vent pipe, and it extracts it better outside. I actually really like this thing. I was trying to build my own version of this using computer fans a while back for one of my other lasers. This is such a better solution. So if you're thinking about venting out of a window, you may want to look into getting this little booster fan because I do think it helps basically extract the fumes even better than it does without it. They also make a filter, so if you don't have access to a window or something like that, you can buy a separate fume extractor, which is basically a giant air filter. You plug the vent pipe into that and it pulls the fumes down into the air filter. You do need to replace those air filters occasionally, just because obviously you are extracting all sorts of things and they're getting stuck in the air filter. But overall, it's a great option if you don't have a window. So what can you make with this machine? So let's first talk about what it can cut. So to start out, it can cut most laser-safe materials, and the more people get into laser cutting, the more easily accessible laser-safe materials are. WeCreat has some on their site, but of course you can buy some from basically any number of manufacturers online or even in store these days. You can cut wood, leather, MDF, cardstock, felt, and then again, you can cut a lot of acrylic, not all acrylic. Again, I'm going to link to that post about cutting acrylic on a diode laser so you can see exactly what you should be able to cut so you can make the right choice. There are a lot of things that it can engrave as well, which just increases the number of projects you can make. And then if you have that infrared module that I mentioned before, you can also engrave things like gold and platinum and silver, things that don't have an engravable coating on them. You can actually engrave with that infrared module. Next, let's talk software. So you have two options. The first is the WeCreat MakeIt software, which is basically designed to work with this machine. It's pretty user-friendly. I do think there is quite a bit of room to grow in the software. There were a few things that just took me a few minutes to figure out. Because I've used so many other softwares, I'm like, okay, where is it in this software? But overall, I think it's pretty beginner friendly, and I think you'll be okay with it. The second option is to use Lightburn. And Lightburn is a basically laser software that a lot of sort of professional people like to use. So if you are a Lightburn user, it integrates really perfectly with this machine, and it makes it very easy. We'll dive in a little bit into the MakeIt software when we make a project later in this video. We're going to be making this frame, and I'll show you how to use it. Now let's talk about a few of the features that make this laser different than some of the others on the market. First, of course, is that auto lifting feature. So you can process things that are very tall without having to buy a separate riser base. That separate riser base is an extra expense. It makes moving a laser around your room a little bit more difficult. So having it integrated into the machine is actually really nice, especially since it can basically go into the riser base and have a much smaller footprint. When you put a project into your laser to process it, the HD camera in the lid will take a picture of it and it will basically autofocus, and the whole thing will move up and down so that it gets the perfect height for cutting your particular project. That being said, if you are shorter than me, you may want to think about putting this on a slightly lower table or getting a step stool. I can use it comfortably, but I think if you're any shorter than I am, you're going to struggle a little bit. If you're short and this thing is at full height, you may find it difficult to get things set in the bed of the laser. A step stool or a slightly lower table is going to work just fine. I actually have an adjustable height table on the other side of the room where I'm keeping this, and I've set that table a little bit lower than the other tables in my office, and it's actually much easier to access things in the bed of the laser. Number 2, and like I said before, this machine comes with air assist. So this air assist basically pushes air onto your project as it's cutting or scoring or engraving, which helps give you a cleaner project, and it can also prevent fires. This is generally an extra expense with other machines, so I was really excited to see that it was included. Now, my preference would be for this to actually be integrated within the machine instead of having another piece, but the fact that it came with it is like the second best option. Super easy to install, you just have to attach this cable and this tube, really easy, and you'll have the air assist connected and you'll be able to make better projects. Third are these slate panels. So these are what go in the bed of the laser, and I have to say that I like these more than any other solution I've seen in the bottom of a laser. There's just 2 of these. They're light, they're easy to move around. Other lasers have these kind of big, clunky honeycomb trays. They've got triangle prisms. They have all these other solutions to get that airflow underneath your project. But the slate panels, for me, far and away the best. There's just 2 of them. They sit right in there. They lock in perfectly. I feel like they are the easiest solution that I've seen on any diode laser. And then I'm going to throw something up on the screen here. This is the Quick View Matrix. So there are a bunch of different materials that you can use, and a lot of these materials have something like this inside the software, which means that you can actually get a visual of how your engraving is going to look on a bunch of different materials. So here we have basswood, so you can actually click on any of these engraving options and it will set automatically. This is a really cool feature. It's really nice to be able to see that visually instead of kind of taking your best guess. You can be like, okay, I want a lighter engrave here, or I want a darker engrave here. With this Quick View Matrix, you kind of just get a visual, and I think that's really helpful. And then finally, there's a feature I haven't actually had a chance to play around with. It's called Smart Fill. So let's say you have 10 wood keychains and you want to engrave the same exact image on all of those keychains. You can basically put those keychains in the bed of your laser, and the software will pop that design on all of the keychains, and you can make them instead of having to copy and paste. There are some caveats to using Smart Fill. You can't do this on black items. Sometimes the light can be a little funny, but I'm going to play around with that a little bit more because I do think it's a cool feature. All right, let's make a project. So we're going to be making this frame today. I highly recommend just making a basic project when you first start using your laser. I think a lot of people are like, I'm going to make this big fancy project as their first project. Don't do it. Make something really simple. Get used to using the laser before you go on to those more advanced projects. So here I am in WeCreat Make It. I have my laser connected over here on the right. Now, when you put a new piece of material into the bed of your machine, it doesn't auto-refresh, and I'm used to that from my other lasers. So click refresh just to make sure that you have the most recent picture. That HD camera will take the picture of your material. And then go over to Discover, and I'm going to choose a project from their library. So let's go Frame, and we're going to make this flower photo frame. I'm going to make it. And it's going to put everything onto my canvas here. So down here at the bottom, you'll see that I have more than one canvas open. So if I click on canvas number 1, you'll see that I have my first pieces here, and then I have my second pieces on this second canvas. So I'm going to go back here to canvas number 1. Again, I'm going to click refresh. I'm not sure where my image went. Now you can see that my image is here. I'm going to select just this single path. I'm going to move it over here so that it fits better on my material. And my material is just the right size for this. So let's fit it right there. Over on the right here, you can see we have our layers panel, and if I scroll down, you can see all of the different parts of this image. These colors down here at the bottom are just different colors that you can make your layers. So for example, if you're cutting a red material, you don't want your layer to be red because it would be very hard to see. So instead, you could make it a different color. So if I have it selected here and I wanted to make it yellow, you can see on the screen that it changes it to yellow. Now this project has both engraving, which is blue, and cutting, which is red. So let's select that engraving layer. And this is where I can see that quick view matrix that I mentioned before. We can see how deep we want the engrave. So if I click on the quick view matrix, it will open it up here on the screen, and I can choose which of these I'd like. You can actually click on these. So if I wanted a lighter engrave, I might go with a speed of 250 and a power of 60. But I want a little slightly darker engrave over here, which is a speed of 200 and a power of 80. If I click on it, it will automatically set my power. So if I click out, you can see here that it set my speed to 200 and my power to 80. You do have to change your own line density. I'm going to keep it at 100, but for some other projects, you may need, a higher line density just to get a more detailed engrave. Before we start, you need to click on autofocus. The HD camera in the machine is going to auto measure the height of our material, and it's going to adjust the riser accordingly. So I'm going to click on autofocus. And then you can see here that it's automatically moving up and down as it tries to figure out where the best place for the laser is. All right, the machine has decided this is where it needs to be, so we can start. And you may notice that your picture looks a little bit different because it actually did that focusing. So I'm getting a little nervous here that this is too close to the edge. I'm going to try and select everything here and move it up just a little bit. Then I can select my circle, move it down and in a little bit. I'm just getting a little nervous about the placement of this here on my piece of basswood. There we go. Maybe I can put it at an angle. Okay, I'm feeling much more comfortable with that. I've got a little bit of give on each of these edges here. I just don't want my image going off the side. Now we can click Start. Here you will see a preview of your image. You'll also see the estimated processing time of 36 minutes. And then there's also a tool here called framing. Now, on this particular image, I can't frame it. So if I click on framing, it says that my image is basically just too big. It's too close to the edge and it's not going to work. But for most projects, if they're smaller, you can frame. I really like the framing function because it basically uses a dot of light to draw on your material exactly where your image is going to go. So if you're trying to get something really precise, like you're trying to use a scrap or you're trying to center something, the laser will actually draw like a little box exactly where it's going to engrave or cut. I do have one thing I don't love about the framing on this machine, and that is that the framing happens automatically. So if I click framing, it starts. Well, normally my computer sits on that side of the room and my laser sits on this side of the room, which means that I can't click framing and get to my laser fast enough to watch it actually frame. So I either have to take my computer over to where my laser is, or I have to have one of my kids press framing and then I watch it. I think this is something they might be able to fix at some point where you have to push the button on the machine to start the framing. This is how it works on some of the other machines I have. That is my preference. So this is one little con here that it's not really that big of a deal, but because I like framing so much, I do wish it was just a little bit easier to use with my computer. All right, now we can hit send and it will send over to our machine and we can cut and engrave it. Once you're ready to go, press the button to start the processing. Once that's done, we're going to do exactly the same with the second canvas. This is just cutting, so we're going to go ahead and cut out our 3 pieces. Once everything is done cutting and engraving, you can assemble your frame. Now, I will say that in their library, none of their projects have instructions. So if you're the type of person who really needs instructions, I'm not sure I would start in their library quite yet. I do think that's something they should go back and add, and probably will at some point. It's still a fairly new software. I think I got this assembled correctly. There is 1 or 2 things I would have done a little bit differently, but overall, I'm really excited with this project. It's just one of those things that you can make right away. It doesn't take a lot of materials or skills, but it can make you get really excited about laser crafting when you can see what you can make. All right, we have gone over so many specs on this machine, but let's talk about the overall pros and cons. My first pro is this auto lifting feature and the fact that you don't have to buy a separate riser base. It's just a cool feature and it means that you're spending a little bit less money. Second, I like that the air assist is included. You don't have to buy that separately. Again, it's not a separate cost. Third, I really like the panels that are in the bottom of the machine. They're kind of my favorite of any that I've tried, and they come with machines, so you don't have to buy them separately. That quick view matrix for choosing engraving settings is very cool. I also like that this has swappable modules, so if I wanted to put an infrared laser head in here, I could make jewelry projects without having to buy a whole new laser. Overall, it's a nice size for hobbyists, it has some really good safety features, and I think it's really reasonably priced, especially when you can find it on sale. My cons for this machine are pretty minor. I would really like an auto refresh on the photo that it takes. I would like the framing not to start automatically. I do wish that all of their projects in their library had instructions for assembly. And then if you're short, the auto rising feature here might be just a little bit difficult to use. You can get around that by putting it on a shorter table or using a step stool, but it's just something to be aware of if you're on the short side. I hope you found this overview of the WeCreat Vision Laser helpful in your buying decisions. If you have any questions, please let me know down in the comments. Again, I will be comparing this laser to some of the other diode lasers I have soon, so if you have questions about how this compares to another laser, ask those down in the comments and I'll make sure to cover them in my upcoming video. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. Follow my channel for more laser, Cricut, and sublimation content. I'll see you next time.